The wrench slipped from my greasy fingers and clanged against the concrete garage floor as my wife's voice drifted through the open kitchen window above me. He's too weak to leave me. Danny would absolutely fall apart without me holding his pathetic life together. The chorus of female laughter that followed hit me like a sledgehammer to the gut. I wiped my hands on an old rag, staying perfectly still beneath my rusted-out Ford pickup. After 15 years of marriage, you'd think Sarah's casual cruelty would stop surprising me. But here I was, 43 years old, lying on my back in my own garage, listening to my wife place bets on my backbone with her wine-drunk girlfriends. "I mean, look at this dump," Sarah continued, her voice carrying that particular tone she reserved for when she thought I couldn't hear. "He's been fixing up this house for 10 years. Meanwhile, I'm the one bringing in real money at the law firm. Without me, he'd be living in some trailer park, drinking beer for breakfast." More laughter. I recognized the voices now, her best friend Jessica, her sister Monica, and probably that new paralegal from her office who always looked at me like I was something she'd scrape off her shoe. I closed my eyes and counted to 10, then 20. The old anger was there, familiar as an old coat, but underneath it was something new, something colder. "Danny's not that bad," came a half-hearted defense from someone. "Jessica, maybe. He built that contracting business from nothing." "Please," Sarah scoffed. 3 employees and a beat-up truck? That's not a business. That's a hobby. If I hadn't gotten him those connections at the firm, he'd still be doing handyman work for old ladies. I rolled out from under the truck and stood up slowly, my knees protesting. Through the window, I could see them clustered around our kitchen island, my kitchen island that I'd built with my own hands from reclaimed barnwood. Sarah was gesturing with her wine glass, animated in a way she never was when talking to me anymore. The worst part? She wasn't entirely wrong. I had been coasting lately, letting her carry more of the financial load while I focused on the house renovations that never seemed to end. But hearing it laid out like that, like I was some charity case she'd been supporting out of pity, I walked to the kitchen door and stepped inside, making sure my work boots hit the hardwood floor with enough noise to announce my presence. The conversation died instantly. "Hey, honey," Sarah said, without missing a beat, that practiced smile sliding across her face like a mask. "We were just talking about the Henderson project. How's the truck coming along?" "Great," I said, meeting her eyes. "Just great. Ladies." I nodded to her friends, noting how they all suddenly found their wine glasses fascinating. I grabbed a beer from the fridge, twisted off the cap, and took a long drink while they sat in uncomfortable silence. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. "Well," Jessica said finally, "I should probably get going. Early morning tomorrow." The others murmured agreement, gathering purses and making their excuses. Within 5 minutes, they'd cleared out like smoke, leaving just Sarah and me standing in our kitchen that suddenly felt too small. "You heard," she said. It wasn't a question. "I heard," she sighed, running her fingers through her perfectly styled blonde hair. "Danny, you know I didn't mean—" "Yeah, you did." I took another drink. "And you know what? Maybe you're right. Maybe I am weak. Maybe I have been coasting." Something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, maybe. She'd been expecting a fight, not agreement. "That's not what I— But here's the thing, Sarah." I set my beer down on the counter with a soft click. "Weak men don't build businesses from nothing. Weak men don't work 60-hour weeks to keep a roof over their family's head. And weak men definitely don't stand in their own kitchen listening to their wife mock them to her friends and just take it. Danny, I'm going to bed. Clean up your mess." I walked past her toward the stairs, then paused at the doorway. "Oh, and Sarah? Next time you want to discuss my inadequacies, maybe close the window. The whole neighborhood doesn't need to hear how disappointed you are in your husband." I left her standing there, mouth open, wine glass trembling in her hand. Upstairs in our bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed we'd shared for over a decade and stared at my reflection in the dresser mirror. Graying hair, lines around my eyes, hands that showed every year of manual labor. When had I started looking so tired? My phone buzzed, a text from my old friend Mike, who owned Riley's Tavern down on Lake Street. Heard some interesting gossip tonight. You doing okay, brother? Small town. News traveled fast, especially the kind that made good bar conversation. I typed back, never better. Why? Just checking. You know where to find me if you need to talk. I set the phone aside and lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling I'd painted 3 years ago when we'd first started talking about renovating the master suite. Like everything else in this house, it was half-finished, waiting for time I never seemed to have. Sarah came up an hour later, moving quietly through her nighttime routine. She slipped into bed beside me, and for a moment I thought she might apologize. Instead, she rolled onto her side, facing away from me. "Good night, Danny," she whispered. Night. But I didn't sleep. I lay there in the dark, listening to her breathing, thinking about masks and the people who wear them, thinking about weakness and strength and the fine line between the two, and thinking about what happens when a weak man finally decides he's tired of being weak. The next morning started like any other. Sarah left for the law firm at 7 sharp, her heels clicking across the hardwood floor like gunshots. She kissed my cheek, a perfunctory peck that felt more like obligation than affection, and told me she'd be working late. "The Morrison case is going to trial next month," she said, checking her reflection in the hallway mirror. "I'll probably be putting in 12-hour days for a while." I nodded, sipping my coffee. "Sure thing. I'll grab dinner with Mike tonight then." She paused, lipstick halfway to her mouth. "Mike Riley?" "Danny, you know how I feel about that place. It's not exactly the kind of establishment where what? Where people like me belong. That's not what I meant." "Right." I stood up, rinsing my mug in the sink. "Have a good day at work, honey." "Try not to talk about what a disappointment I am until at least lunch." She flinched like I'd slapped her. Good. My first job that morning was at the Hendersons' place, a kitchen remodel that was running 3 weeks behind schedule thanks to supply chain issues with the custom cabinets. Mrs. Henderson met me at the door with coffee and homemade muffins, the kind of genuine hospitality that reminded me why I loved this work. "How's Sarah doing?" she asked as I set up my tools. "I haven't seen her at the grocery store lately." "Busy with work, you know how it is." Mrs. Henderson nodded, but something in her expression suggested she knew more than she was letting on. Small towns were like that. Everyone knew everyone else's business, sometimes before they knew it themselves. I spent the morning installing the new cabinet hardware, losing myself in the familiar rhythm of precise, careful work. There was something therapeutic about taking broken things and making them whole again. If only marriages were as straightforward as kitchen cabinets. Around noon, my phone rang. Jessica's name appeared on the screen. I almost didn't answer. Sarah's best friend calling me directly was unusual, to say the least. We'd never been particularly close. She'd always struck me as the type who thought she was better than everyone else because she drove a BMW and vacationed in the Hamptons. "Danny?" Her voice sounded strained. "Do you have a minute to talk?" "I'm working, Jess." "What's up?" "It's about last night." About what Sarah said. She paused, and I could hear traffic in the background. "I think you should know that some of us didn't agree with her. What she said was cruel and unfair." I set down my drill. "Some of you?" Monica laughed along, but you know how she is. She's always resented that Sarah married someone outside her social circle, and that new girl from the office, Brittany, she was just trying to fit in. "But not you?" "No, not me." Another pause. "Danny, I've known you for 8 years. You're a good man. You work hard, you love your family, and you've always treated Sarah well. Better than she deserves, if I'm being honest." This was unexpected. Jessica defending me? Why are you telling me this? "Because I've been watching my best friend turn into someone I don't recognize." She's become bitter and critical and mean. The Sarah I knew in college would never have humiliated her husband like that. I walked over to the window, looking out at the Hendersons' backyard where Mr. Henderson was tending his vegetable garden. People change, I guess. Not like this. Not this dramatically. Jessica's voice dropped to almost a whisper. Danny, I think there might be someone else. The words hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the windowsill, my knuckles going white. What do you mean? I think Sarah might be having an affair. The world seemed to tilt sideways. I sat down heavily on Mrs. Henderson's kitchen stool, trying to process what I'd just heard. You think? Or you know? I think. But Danny, the signs are all there. The late nights, the new clothes, the way she's been talking about you. It's like she's trying to justify something to herself. Who? I don't know for sure. But there's this guy at her gym, Tony something. He's one of those personal trainer types, all muscles and fake tan and charm. She's mentioned him a few times lately. Tony. I knew the name. Sarah had started going to some upscale fitness center downtown about 6 months ago, claiming she needed to get in shape for swimsuit season. She'd been coming home later and later from her workouts, always with some excuse about staying for a yoga class or grabbing a smoothie with her trainer. Jessica, why are you telling me this? Because you deserve better. Because Sarah is my friend, but what she's doing is wrong. And because... She trailed off. Because what? Because I think she's planning to leave you. The way she talks about the house, about your business, about your future together, it's like she's already mentally checked out. After Jessica hung up, I sat in the Hendersons' kitchen for a long time, staring at the half-installed cabinet. Hardware. Mrs. Henderson had gone out to run errands, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the sound of the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. An affair. It made a sick kind of sense. The distance between us, the criticism, the way she'd been picking fights over nothing. Classic deflection behavior. Make me the villain so she could justify her betrayal. I thought about the man Jessica had described. Tony, the personal trainer, all muscles and fake tan. Everything I wasn't. Everything Sarah apparently wanted instead of me. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Working late again. Don't wait up. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, no problem. Have fun. But instead of going home that evening, I drove downtown to the Platinum Fitness Center where Sarah had been spending so much time lately. It was one of those trendy places with floor-to-ceiling windows and expensive equipment, the kind of gym that cost more per month than most people spent on groceries. I parked across the street and waited. At 8:30, Sarah's silver Lexus pulled into the parking lot. She got out, looking around nervously before walking toward the entrance. She was wearing workout clothes I'd never seen before, designer athletic wear that probably cost more than I made in a day. 20 minutes later, she came back out, but she wasn't alone. The man walking beside her was everything Jessica had described and more. Tall, muscular, with the kind of artificially perfect appearance that screamed personal trainer. He had his hand on the small of Sarah's back as they walked to her car, leaning in close to whisper something that made her laugh. I watched them talk for another 10 minutes, their body language intimate and familiar. When he finally kissed her, not a friendly peck, but a real kiss, the kind she hadn't given me in months, I felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. Sarah drove away first, followed a few minutes later by the trainer in a red Mustang convertible. I sat in my truck for another half hour, processing what I'd just witnessed. My wife was cheating on me. With a personal trainer named Tony who drove a Mustang and probably had abs you could bounce quarters off. The worst part wasn't the betrayal itself, though that hurt like hell. The worst part was the relief. Finally, an explanation for the distance, the criticism, the way she'd been treating me like an inconvenience in my own life. I drove home to our empty house, poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon, and sat in my half-finished living room, surrounded by renovation projects I'd probably never complete. My phone rang. Mike. Hey, brother. You still want to grab that beer? Yeah, I said. I think I do. Riley's Tavern hadn't changed in 20 years. Same scarred wooden bar, same neon beer signs, same smell of cigarettes and disappointment that clung to the walls like paint. It was the kind of place Sarah would never set foot in, which made it perfect for tonight. Mike was behind the bar, polishing glasses and nodding at whatever story old Pete was telling about his fishing trip. When he saw me walk in, he set down the glass and grabbed 2 bottles of beer from the cooler. You look like hell, he said, sliding a bottle across the bar. Feel worse. I took a long drink, letting the cold beer wash away the taste of betrayal. Jessica called me today. Thought I should know my wife's probably cheating on me. Mike didn't look surprised. With the musclehead from the gym? I stared at him. You knew? Danny, everyone knows. This is a small town. Sarah's not exactly being discreet about it. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. Tony Marchetti owns that fancy fitness place downtown. Used to be married to some doctor's daughter, but she divorced him when she caught him sleeping with half his female clients. And now he's sleeping with my wife. Looks that way. I drained half the bottle in one go. How long? Couple months, maybe. Started hearing whispers around the time she joined that gym. Mike studied my face. What are you going to do? That was the question, wasn't it? What does a man do when he discovers his wife of 15 years has been cheating on him with a walking cliché? I don't know, I admitted. Confront her, I guess. Get a lawyer. Figure out how to split up a life we built together. That's one option. Something in his tone made me look up. Mike was watching me with an expression I'd seen before, back in high school when we'd gotten into trouble and needed to figure out how to get even. What's the other option? He grinned, but it wasn't a nice expression. You remember what happened to Tommy Brennan when he thought he could push you around senior year? I remembered. Tommy had been the classic high school bully, bigger, stronger, meaner than most of us. He'd made the mistake of cornering me in the locker room one day, thinking I'd be an easy target. Instead, I'd waited until the next football game and filled his gym bag with honey and feathers. He'd had to walk through the entire school looking like a demented chicken. That was different. We were kids. Were we? Mike leaned back against the bar. Or were we just younger? Because the way I see it, your wife and her boyfriend are acting like a couple of teenagers who think they're smarter than everyone else. Maybe it's time to remind them they're not. Mike, I'm not talking about anything illegal, Danny. I'm talking about giving them a taste of their own medicine. They want to humiliate you? Turn the tables. I thought about Sarah's voice drifting through the kitchen window, placing bets on my backbone with her friends, about the way Tony had touched her back in the parking lot, like he owned her, about 15 years of marriage reduced to gossip fodder for a small town. They think I'm weak, I said. Are you? I don't know anymore. Mike reached under the bar and pulled out a manila folder. Maybe this will help you decide. I opened it. Inside were photographs, Sarah and Tony at a restaurant across town, holding hands across a candlelit table. Sarah and Tony outside a motel on Route 9. Sarah and Tony kissing in the parking lot of her gym. How did you... I know people. People who don't like seeing good men get screwed over by their cheating wives and her pretty boy trainer. I stared at the photos, feeling something cold and hard crystallize in my chest. She's been lying to me for months. Yeah, she has. Making me feel like I was the problem, like I was the one failing our marriage, while she was screwing around with Captain America over there. I looked up at Mike. You said something about turning the tables. His grin widened. Now you're talking. But Danny, if we're going to do this, we do it right. No half measures. No backing down when things get messy. They want to play games? We'll show them how the game is really played. What did you have in mind? Mike pulled out his phone and showed me Tony's Instagram page. The guy was exactly what you'd expect. Shirtless selfies, motivational quotes about living your best life, photos of expensive dinners and weekend trips. The kind of social media presence that screamed narcissist. Guy like this, his whole life is about image, Mike said. His business, his reputation, his social media following. Take that away, and what's left? Nothing. Exactly. And your wife? She's all about status and appearances, right? What happens when her affair becomes public knowledge? When everyone in town knows she threw away a 15-year marriage for a gym rat who can't keep it in his pants? I thought about Sarah's carefully curated life, her position at the law firm, her social circle, her reputation as the successful, professional married to the blue-collar guy who was lucky to have her. It would destroy her. Only if she cares more about what people think than about what's right. And based on what I've seen, I'd say that's exactly the case. We spent the next 2 hours planning. Mike had contacts throughout the town, bartenders, waitresses, shop owners, people who saw everything and remembered more. Within a week, he could have documentation of every time Sarah and Tony had been together in public. The beauty of a small town, he said, is that everyone talks. But it's also the curse. Once word gets out about something like this, there's no putting it back in the bottle. What about my daughter? I asked. Emma's a senior in high school. This kind of scandal? Mike's expression softened. That's the risk, Danny. But ask yourself, is it better for her to grow up thinking it's okay for people to treat her father like garbage? Or is it better for her to see that actions have consequences? Emma. My 17-year-old daughter who'd been distant lately, spending more time with her friends than at home. I'd assumed it was normal teenage behavior, but now I wondered if she'd picked up on the tension between Sarah and me. She might hate me for it. She might. Or she might respect you for finally standing up for yourself. I finished my beer and stared at the empty bottle. If we do this, there's no going back. No, there's not. But Danny, there's already no going back. Your marriage is over. Sarah made that choice when she decided to cheat. The only question now is whether you're going to let her control the narrative or if you're going to write your own story. I thought about the man I used to be. The guy who'd built a business from nothing, who'd renovated houses with his bare hands, who'd once filled a bully's gym bag with honey and feathers because sometimes the only way to deal with a bully was to become something they didn't expect. They think I'm weak, I said again. Then let's show them how wrong they are. When I got home that night, Sarah was already in bed pretending to sleep. I stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at the woman I'd loved for 15 years, the woman who'd been systematically destroying our marriage while making me feel like it was my fault. Tomorrow, I'd start gathering evidence. Tomorrow, I'd begin the process of showing Sarah and Tony and everyone else in this small town that Danny Morrison wasn't the weak, pathetic man they thought he was. Tomorrow, I'd stop being the victim and start being something else entirely. But tonight, I sat in my half-finished living room with another glass of bourbon, planning the downfall of my cheating wife and her muscle-bound boyfriend. They wanted a villain? Fine, I'd be the villain. The first thing I did the next morning was drive to the electronics store in the next town over and buy a small digital camera with a telephoto lens. Cash transaction, no record. The kid behind the counter didn't even look up from his phone. The second thing I did was call in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. You feeling okay, boss? Asked Tommy, my lead carpenter. You never get sick. Just need a personal day, I told him. Think you can handle the Henderson job without me? Sure thing. You want me to check on the Morrison project too? The Morrison project, a kitchen remodel for a family on the other side of town, no relation despite the shared name. The irony wasn't lost on me. Yeah, do that. I'll be back tomorrow. I spent the day following Sarah's routine, learning her patterns in a way I'd never bothered to before. She left the law firm at lunch and drove to Platinum Fitness, where she met Tony in the parking lot. They went inside together and emerged an hour later, both looking flushed and satisfied in a way that had nothing to do with exercise. From there, they went to a coffee shop downtown, sitting in a corner booth where they thought no one would notice them. I sat 3 tables away, camera hidden in a newspaper, documenting their intimate conversation. The photos were damning. Sarah leaning across the table to touch Tony's hand, Tony stroking her cheek, both of them laughing like teenagers in love, completely oblivious to the world around them. But the real prize came when they left the coffee shop and drove to the Riverside Motel on Route 9. I parked behind a dumpster and waited, camera ready. They stayed for 2 hours. When they finally emerged, Sarah looked around nervously before getting into her car. Tony was more brazen, stretching in the afternoon sun like a cat, completely comfortable with his role as the other man. I got pictures of everything. The parking lot meeting, the motel room door, their guilty expressions as they parted ways. By the time I got home that evening, I had enough evidence to end my marriage and destroy both their reputations. Sarah came home at 7, claiming she'd been working late on a deposition. "How was your day?" she asked, not really listening as she poured herself a glass of wine. "Productive," I said. "Very productive." That night, I uploaded the photos to my laptop and created a folder labeled Evidence. Then I called Mike. "How'd it go?" "Better than expected. I've got enough pictures to wallpaper the courthouse." "Good. Phase 2 starts tomorrow." Phase 2 was psychological warfare. Mike had explained the strategy over beers. Instead of confronting Sarah directly, we'd start planting seeds of doubt and paranoia. Make her wonder if people were talking, if her secret was getting out. The first seed was planted by Mike himself, who mentioned to his bartender that he'd seen Sarah Morrison having coffee with some guy who wasn't her husband. The bartender, a notorious gossip, would have that information circulating through half the town by the weekend. The second seed came from Mrs. Henderson, who'd been more than happy to help when I explained the situation. She made a point of running into Sarah at the grocery store and mentioning how she'd heard Sarah had been working out a lot lately and hoping she wasn't overdoing it. Small comments, innocent on the surface, but designed to make Sarah paranoid. Was people talking? Did they know something? By the end of the week, Sarah was a nervous wreck. "People have been acting strange around me," she said over dinner Friday night. Mrs. Henderson made some weird comment about my workout routine, and the barista at that coffee place downtown kept staring at me. I looked up from my plate with practiced innocence. Strange how? Like they know something I don't. Like they're judging me. "Honey, you're being paranoid." This is a small town. People stare at everyone. But I could see the doubt in her eyes, the worry that her carefully constructed double life was starting to crumble. The weekend brought Emma home from a sleepover at her friend's house. My daughter had inherited Sarah's blonde hair and sharp features, but she'd gotten my stubborn streak and my tendency to speak her mind. "Mom's been acting weird lately," she said, finding me in the garage where I was pretending to work on the truck, like weirder than usual. "How so?" "She keeps checking her phone and jumping every time it rings. And she's been asking me a lot of questions about what people at school are saying about our family." I set down my wrench. "What do you tell her?" Emma shrugged. "That nobody at school cares about our family because we're boring. But Dad..." She hesitated, then looked directly at me. "Are you and Mom getting divorced?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. "Why would you ask that?" "Because you guys barely talk to each other anymore. Because Mom's been staying out late all the time. Because the whole house feels like a bomb waiting to go off." Smart kid. Too smart for her own good, maybe. "Emma, your mom and I are going through a rough patch. But whatever happens, it's not your fault, and we both love you. That will never change." She nodded, but I could see the fear in her eyes. 17 years old and already learning that the adults in her life weren't as stable as she'd thought. Is there someone else? She asked quietly. I could have lied. Should have lied, probably. But Emma deserved better than that. I think so, sweetheart. I think there might be. She was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Then, what are you going to do about it? I'm going to handle it. But it might get messy for a while. Messier than it already is? I looked around the garage, at the half-finished projects and broken dreams that seemed to define my life lately. Yeah, probably messier than it already is. That night, Sarah went out again, claiming she was meeting Jessica for drinks. But I'd already called Jessica, who confirmed she was home with her kids and hadn't spoken to Sarah all week. I followed my wife to the Riverside Motel, where Tony was waiting in his red Mustang. They went into room 237 and didn't come out for 3 hours. I sat in my truck, taking pictures and planning their destruction. On Sunday morning, Sarah announced she was going shopping with her sister Monica. Another lie. Monica was out of town visiting their parents in Florida. Instead, Sarah met Tony at a restaurant in the next town over, where they held hands across the table and talked like a couple planning their future together. I photographed everything from a booth in the back corner, just another middle-aged guy having lunch alone. The waitress felt sorry for me and gave me extra coffee. If she only knew I was documenting the end of my marriage, she might have offered something stronger. When I got home, Emma was in the living room, surrounded by college brochures and scholarship applications. How's the planning going? I asked. Good. I think I want to study journalism, maybe become an investigative reporter. Following in your old man's footsteps, huh? Digging up the truth? She looked at me sharply. Is that what you're doing, Dad? Digging up the truth? Something like that. Good, she said firmly. Someone should. That night, I printed out the best photos and put them in a manila envelope. Tomorrow, the real war would begin. Sarah came home late, as usual, with a story about traffic and a last-minute client meeting. She kissed my cheek with lips that had probably been on Tony's mouth an hour earlier. Good night, Danny, she said, heading upstairs. Good night, Sarah. But I didn't go to bed. I sat in my living room with the envelope of photos, thinking about marriage and betrayal and the fine line between justice and revenge. Tomorrow, Sarah and Tony would learn that actions have consequences. Tomorrow, the weak man they thought they knew would show them exactly how wrong they'd been. Monday morning, I drove to Platinum Fitness at 6 a.m. and waited in the parking lot. Tony arrived at 6:30 in his red Mustang, coffee in hand, looking like he owned the world. I waited until he went inside, then got to work. The first gift was a bag of flour, poured liberally over his car's interior through a window I'd carefully cracked open. The second was a note tucked under his windshield wiper. Hope she's worth it. A concerned citizen. By the time he discovered my handiwork at lunch, I was long gone. The second phase happened at Sarah's law firm. I'd called ahead and made an appointment with her boss, Richard Hartwell, claiming I needed legal advice about a property dispute. Danny Morrison, he said, shaking my hand in his corner office. Sarah's mentioned you. How can I help? Actually, Mr. Hartwell, I think I can help you. I placed the manila envelope on his desk and watched his expression change as he looked through the photographs. Jesus Christ, he muttered, studying a particularly damning shot of Sarah and Tony outside the motel. How long has this been going on? Couple months, as far as I can tell. I thought you should know, given that Sarah's been using company time for her extracurricular activities. Hartwell's face was grim. Danny, I appreciate you bringing this to my attention. This kind of behavior reflects poorly on the entire firm. I'm not looking to get her fired, I lied smoothly. I just thought you should be aware of the situation. Of course. And Danny, I'm sorry. This can't be easy for you. No, sir. It's not. I left the law firm knowing that Sarah's reputation there was effectively destroyed. Word would spread through the office by the end of the day. Her colleagues would look at her differently, whisper when she walked by, question her professionalism. The third phase was the most satisfying. I drove to Riley's Tavern, where Mike was waiting with a laptop and a wicked grin. "You ready for this?" he asked. "More than ready." He pulled up Tony's Instagram account, which had over 5,000 followers. Most of them were local women who followed him for fitness tips and shirtless selfies. "I've been working on this all weekend," Mike said, showing me a series of fake screenshots he'd created. Anonymous tips about steroid use, sleeping with married clients, financial problems. Nothing we can't back up if we need to. How are you going to get them out there? Anonymous accounts, fake profiles, carefully timed comments on his posts. By tomorrow morning, his reputation will be in the toilet. We spent 2 hours crafting the perfect social media assassination. Anonymous comments about Tony's unprofessional behavior with married clients. Fake reviews of his gym mentioning inappropriate conduct. Screenshots of supposed text messages from other women he'd allegedly cheated with. None of it was technically illegal, just rumors and innuendo, the kind of gossip that spread like wildfire in small towns. The beauty of this, Mike explained, is that even if he denies everything, the damage is done. People will always wonder if there's truth to it. What about Sarah? Leave her to me. I've got something special planned for your wife. I didn't ask what he meant. I was learning to trust Mike's instincts for psychological warfare. That evening, I waited at home for Sarah to return from her late client meeting. When she walked through the door at 9 p.m., she looked shaken. "Rough day?" I asked innocently. "Someone vandalized Tony's car at the gym. Poured flour all over the interior and left some kind of threatening note." "Tony?" "My personal trainer. I told you about him." "Right, the one you've been spending so much time with." She shot me a sharp look. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing. Just seems like you mention him a lot lately." Sarah poured herself a large glass of wine and sat down across from me at the kitchen table. "Danny, is there something you want to say to me?" This was it, the moment of truth. I could confront her directly, lay out all the evidence, demand an explanation. Or I could continue playing the long game, letting her paranoia and guilt destroy her from the inside. I chose the latter. "I love you, Sarah. You know that, right?" The unexpected declaration caught her off guard. Yes, of course." "Good. Because lately I've been feeling like we're drifting apart. Like maybe you're not happy in our marriage." "Danny, I just want you to know that whatever's going on, we can work through it. If there's something you need to tell me, something you've been keeping secret, I'd rather hear it from you than from someone else." Her face went pale. "What do you mean, someone else?" "Small town, honey. People talk. And lately I've been hearing some interesting conversations. It was a bluff, but it worked." Sarah's hands started shaking. "What kind of conversations?" "The kind that make a man question everything he thought he knew about his marriage." She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the war playing out behind her eyes. Confess or deny? Come clean or double down on the lies? She chose denial. "I don't know what you think you've heard, but our marriage is fine. I'm fine. Everything is fine." "If you say so." But nothing was fine, and we both knew it. The next morning brought the first wave of social media destruction. Tony's Instagram was flooded with comments questioning his professionalism and ethics. His business Facebook page was bombarded with negative reviews. Anonymous accounts were sharing screenshots of supposed conversations with other women he'd allegedly seduced. By noon, he'd deleted all his social media accounts. Sarah came home from work early, looking like she'd seen a ghost. "Tony's in crisis mode," she said, pacing around the kitchen. "Someone's been spreading rumors about him online. Terrible things. His business is being destroyed." "That's awful," I said, not looking up from the newspaper. "What kind of rumors?" That he sleeps with married clients, that he's unprofessional and unethical. Is there any truth to them? The question hung in the air like smoke. Sarah stopped pacing and stared at me. Of course not. Tony would never, he's not that kind of person. How well do you really know him? Well enough. Do you? She didn't answer. That night, Phase 4 began. Mike had outdone himself, creating a network of gossip that spread through the town like wildfire. By Thursday, everyone was talking about Tony Marchetti and his alleged affairs with married clients. And increasingly, they were speculating about which married women might be involved. Sarah's name started coming up in conversations at the grocery store, the bank, the post office. Nothing direct, nothing actionable, just whispered speculation and knowing looks. I can't go anywhere without people staring at me, Sarah complained Friday night. It's like they all know some secret I don't. Maybe you should talk to Tony about it, I suggested. If his reputation is affecting you, maybe it's time to find a new trainer. I can't abandon him when he's going through this. He needs support from his friends. Friends. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. Of course, I said. You're a loyal person, Sarah. It's one of the things I've always admired about you. The irony was lost on her. Saturday brought the final phase of my plan. Mike had arranged for a photographer friend to be at the Riverside Motel when Sarah and Tony had their usual weekend rendezvous. The photos were spectacular. Sarah and Tony entering the motel room together. Tony's distinctive red Mustang in the parking lot. Both of them looking guilty and furtive as they tried to avoid being seen. Sunday morning, copies of those photos were anonymously delivered to a dozen key people around town. The bank president where Sarah had her accounts, the principal at Emma's high school, several partners at Sarah's law firm, the president of the country club where Sarah played tennis. By Monday morning, Sarah Morrison's secret was a secret no more. I was in my garage, actually working on the truck for once, when she came home early from work. She looked like she'd been crying. "Danny," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need to talk." I set down my tools and followed her into the house. She sat at the kitchen table, her hands folded in her lap like a schoolgirl called to the principal's office. "I've been having an affair," she said. Finally. The truth. "I know," I said simply. She looked up, startled. "You know? I've known for weeks, Sarah. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" I don't know. I never meant for it to happen. It just what? Just happened? Just fell into his bed by accident? It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. You made a choice. Every time you lied to me, every time you went to that motel, every time you kissed him in public while wearing my wedding ring, you made a choice. She started crying then, big heaving sobs that might have moved me a month ago. Now they just sounded like the death rattle of our marriage. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry, Danny. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did hurt me. You humiliated me. You made me feel like I was crazy, like I was the problem in our marriage. You weren't the problem. I was. I am." "Yes, you are." She looked up at me through her tears. "Can you forgive me? Can we try to work through this?" I thought about forgiveness, about second chances and marriage counseling and the possibility of rebuilding what we'd lost. Then I thought about her voice drifting through the kitchen window, placing bets on my backbone with her friends. "No," I said. "I don't think I can. Danny, please. The whole town knows, Sarah. About you and Tony, about the motel, about everything. Your reputation is destroyed. Your career is probably over. And you know what the worst part is?" She shook her head. "You did it to yourself. Every choice, every lie, every betrayal. That was all you." I stood up and walked toward the door, then turned back. I'll be staying at Mike's for a while. You can have the house until we figure out the divorce proceedings. But Sarah? Yes? Next time you want to discuss what a weak, pathetic man your husband is, you might want to make sure he can't hear you. Because weak men don't build businesses from nothing. Weak men don't fight back when they're betrayed. And weak men definitely don't systematically destroy the lives of people who try to destroy them. I left her sitting at our kitchen table, crying into her hands, surrounded by the wreckage of the life she'd chosen to throw away. Outside, I got in my truck and drove to Riley's Tavern, where Mike was waiting with a beer and a satisfied smile. "How'd it go?" he asked. "Better than I expected." "And Tony? What about him?" Mike grinned and showed me his phone. Tony's gym had a "closed until further notice" sign in the window. His red Mustang was for sale in the classified ads. Word around town was that he was leaving, heading to Florida to start over somewhere his reputation hadn't preceded him. "Looks like your wife's boyfriend decided he didn't like small-town life after all," Mike said. I raised my beer in a toast. To weak men who turn out to be stronger than anyone expected. To weak men, Mike agreed. We drank to the end of my marriage and the beginning of whatever came next.